Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Biology Daily Booster, number 10 in the series. Do note that this is again one of the advanced information topics, and this time it is both foundation and higher who are the lucky winners of this as the advanced information. What we're going to do then is we're going to be having a look at some different aspects that are all quite closely tied together in this booster. We're going to be having a look at the circulatory system, and we're going to have a look at why we need this really. So let's start off with the why. First thing, we need to understand the definition: surface area to volume ratio. So when we talk about the surface area to volume ratio, this is the surface area per unit volume of an object. Now, this is going to be really important as far as living things are concerned, because this surface area to volume ratio is going to determine whether we can get everything we need by diffusion, or if we're going to need something else to supply those vital components to our organism. And what we find is a very simple pattern. The larger the organism is, the lower the surface area to volume ratio becomes. So that means a bacteria, single-celled organism, is going to have a high surface area to volume ratio. That means diffusion is going to be sufficient to supply it with everything it needs. So all of the oxygen, etc., can just diffuse into that single cell at a rate that allows it to carry out all the processes without problem. If we then consider a larger organism, such as us as humans, then we have a lower surface area to volume ratio, and that means diffusion is not going to be sufficient on its own, because the rate of diffusion would be too slow to supply all of our cells with what they need to carry out all those processes. Because of that, we would normally be limited to a certain size if all we had was diffusion at our disposal. But we're not limited in size to a great extent anyway, because multicellular organisms have developed these special adaptations. And the whole purpose of these adaptations is to increase that surface area to volume ratio at those key exchange sites, things like the lungs, for example. One of the things that they could ask you to do on this paper is one of the maths-based questions. So remember, 10% of your paper will be maths-based questions, and this is a great example where they could do it. Now, they're not going to say calculate the surface area of a lung. They're going to pick a lovely easy shape, a cube. So to calculate the surface area of a cube, it's length times width times the number of faces, so that's 6. And the volume of a cube, length times width times height. If they were to ask you to calculate the surface area to volume ratio, then all we would do is then just write down your surface area of your cube. So if we were to have 24, for example, put the colon in, and then if the volume was 8, put the 8 in, and then we have to simplify it. So if we've got 24 to 8, then hopefully we work out that 8 goes into 24 3 times and only once into 8. So our 3 to 1 is the surface area to volume ratio. This then leads us on to the adaptations we see within the human body for the transport of these substances. So we're going to focus on the circulatory system. When we talk about the circulatory system, we're talking about the heart, the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. So the heart and the 3 types of blood vessel that you need to know about. The first phrase we need to understand with the circulatory system is double circulatory system. We describe it as a double circulatory system for the simple fact that the blood flows through the heart twice on one circuit around the body. So the key phrasing here, if they ask you to describe what is meant by double circulatory system, then it needs to be blood flows through the heart twice on one circuit. You've got to have the twice and the one circuit around the body, otherwise you've not got a full explanation there. That does mean that it's going to be pumped twice by the heart. This has some key advantages. The one that we're going to focus on is all to do with pressure. What it means is that we can actually have blood under a higher pressure in that double circulatory system than in a single circulatory system. That means that we can actually move the blood around the body more efficiently when we're talking about this larger size body. The second phrase they could throw in is this idea of a closed system, and it's closed because the blood remains within the vessels the whole time it is circulating. So double because it flows through the heart twice on one circuit around the body, closed because the blood remains in vessels the whole time. We now need to focus a little bit more closely on the heart itself. So key points to take away here. There are 4 chambers. We have 2 atria, which are the ones at the top, and 2 ventricles, which are the ones at the bottom. You do need to make sure you can tell the left and the right of the heart in a diagram. So when you're looking at it, remember the left-hand side and the right-hand side are actually different to how you see it. So what I mean by that is, as you're looking at the left-hand side of the diagram, that is the right side of the heart, and vice versa. In the heart, we have these special structures called valves, and the valves are there to stop the backflow of blood. So if ever you're asked what is the purpose or what is the function of a valve, to stop the backflow of blood is our 1-mark answer we give. If we look at the heart, you can see in the little diagram there that the left-hand side has a much thicker muscle wall. The reason for that is that it's got to pump blood all the way around the body, whereas the right-hand side is only pumping blood as far as the lungs. So the right side has a thinner muscle wall because it's only going as far as the lungs, and we need to keep it at a lower pressure to avoid damaging the delicate tissue, whereas the left-hand side, thicker muscle wall to pump the blood all the way around the body. This little flowchart is just to help you get the different parts of the heart correct in your head in the right order. So we're going to start at the top with the vena cava. This is the vein that delivers the blood back to the heart from around the body. The vena cava allows blood to flow into the right atrium. It then flows through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. And you can see I've highlighted tri and right, the sort of TRI and the RI of right, as a little hint as to how it can help you to remember which valve goes where. So tricuspid has an RI, just like right, the side it's on. From the right ventricle, it will flow through the semilunar valve, which then goes into the pulmonary artery. Pulmonary just means lungs, and that takes the blood off the lungs where it becomes oxygenated. It then comes back to the heart through the pulmonary vein, into the left atrium, through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle, and then through the semilunar valve into the aorta, round the body, before coming back through the vena cava. You'll notice the semilunar valves are basically between the ventricles and the vessel leaving the heart. Tricuspid, right atrium, right ventricle, bicuspid, left atrium, left ventricle. So make sure you know the 3 names of the valves and where they are. We now need to have a little look at the different blood vessels that we've mentioned. So first one, arteries. These have a thick muscular and elastic wall, and the reason for that is the blood is under high pressure as it leaves the heart. If it didn't have that thick muscle and elastic wall, it would burst under the pressure. So when we're looking at the picture, you'll always spot the artery because it has this very thick muscle and elastic wall and a much smaller lumen. Veins, however, have a thinner wall and a larger lumen. They can ask you to compare the structure of veins and arteries. If you get a compare question, do make sure you are including that ER, the comparative ending to our word. Don't just say veins have a thin wall. That's not enough. If you were to say veins have a thin wall and arteries have a thick wall, fine. Or you could say veins have a thinner wall than arteries. But it has to be comparative between the 2 things that you are actually comparing. In our veins, blood is under a much lower pressure than in arteries, which means we must have valves. So if they ask you for differences, then we can say that veins have a thinner wall, they have a larger lumen, and they have valves to stop the backflow of blood. There's 3 differences between your veins and your arteries. The third and final blood vessel we need to concern ourselves with is the capillary, and it is the capillaries at which the exchanges take place. So they have these semi-permeable walls that are only a single cell thick. Go back to what we said in our previous booster about diffusion. then if we've got a small distance, we have a faster rate of diffusion. 1 cell thick means we've increased the rate of diffusion there. So that's why we only have that 1 cell thick wall on our capillary, is so that we have rapid diffusion. We do need to know a little bit about 2 components of blood at this point. The red blood cells, first of all. As the name suggests, the red blood cells are the ones that in our little picture, if it's in colour, are the reddish coloured ones. Now, they do have this very special shape called a biconcave disc, and that's all to do with increasing surface area to volume ratio. Higher surface area to volume ratio means more rapid diffusion, in this case of oxygen into our red blood cells at the lungs, for example. Now, inside the red blood cell, they have this carrier protein called hemoglobin, and that binds the oxygen for transport. And to make more space for hemoglobin, they have no nucleus. So one of those key features about red blood cells we should know is they do not have a nucleus, just for the sake of leaving room for hemoglobin. They're also very small in size to fit through those capillaries. And what we also find is that they are going to have this large surface area to volume ratio so that we have rapid diffusion. Hopefully we do know the whole purpose of our red blood cells, as we've been talking about, is to transport oxygen around the body. So make sure you know at least 2 of these different adaptations of our red blood cells, if you like. The other part of blood we need to know about for this unit is plasma. Now, plasma is this straw-coloured liquid that all of the blood cells float in, but it also has another role in carrying some key elements of the body. So it's going to carry digested food, it's going to carry waste products, it carries the hormones and the antibodies. So plasma is all to do with helping to transport these different substances around the body. Final thing to do for today then is head on over and have a go at our quiz. Obviously, if there are topics that you don't score well on, then have a look at the main video on the channel just to reinforce that knowledge, or go through your revision notes, your actual classwork, just to make sure you are confident in these topics before your exam. And don't forget to join us again tomorrow for our next Daily Booster.